We're live. Really excited to have Max Jimenez with us today. Max, thank you so much for joining us, man.
Yeah, of course, brother. Of course. And I want to apologize because, like I said, my landscaper just showed up all of a sudden. So it might come through the sound here a little bit.
Oh yeah, no worries, man. Yeah, it's all good. You got to deal with distractions and things
Yeah,
come up,
absolutely.
so it's all part of the
Absolutely,
game.
brother. But thank you for inviting me, bro. It's an honor to be here. I know we're connected somehow through an acquaintance, but finally, it's great to meet you, man.
Yeah, sure, man. Yeah, I love all the stuff you're doing. Love the content that you're putting out there. Lots of great stuff. I know I get a lot of great takeaways from it. Definitely love that you're faith based too.
Yeah.
I love that you put that out there because I know a lot of people don't, and
Yep.
I love that you spread that message as well, man.
Absolutely, bro. That's my core right there, man. Because that's you got to have a foundation, brother.
100%. So how did you get started? And for people who don't know on my channel, do you want to introduce yourself and who you are?
Yeah, of course. For people that don't know me, my name is Max Jimenez. I've been in this business. I started back in 2015. I found out about this business wholesaling right in 2015, and I really didn't do much. Right, I was attending a couple of meetups like everyone that starts. I went to my first actual real estate event October of 2015. Learned a lot. I'm actually blessed that I went to that event just because a lot of events don't really have a lot of meat. We'll get into that a little bit
Mm,
later, but that event really had really practical things and stuff that that I can go out and apply. And at this point, I was still working on my job, so I learned a lot of ways. And back then, it was a lot of direct mail letters, yellow letters, and then bandit signs, right?
mm,
Which some people still use that, but it's not as prominent as it was back then. Door knocking, driving for dollars, and so I found that I found that and so basically it was through Sean Terry.
mm.
That's who I actually went under, and then after that, I didn't really start taking action until about January, February of 2016, and I ended up. It took me about 10 months, brother, to get my first deal. And when I got my first deal, that was it. That's all I needed. I needed that proof.
Mm.
It was the deal was like $11,800, and I basically went all in. But I don't want it to sound like that was the easy route, right? And we'll get into like some of the things that I did during that transition, right? Of making sure that I was not only working on the business, but I was working on myself because I'm a big believer. And one of my mentors that I admire a lot, which is Jim Rohn, right? Passed away a long time ago, but he's always been my mentor. He said this one thing is self-development rarely supersedes income, right?
Mm.
So which means that the more you work on yourself, surprisingly, the more success that you have. And so from the transition of going through to that first real estate event, I went into a period of, I would say, at least 4 months of really not watching movies, listening to music, maybe even not attending parties and family gatherings. And I know it's a little extreme, but that's what I had to do because I needed to rewire myself. I was already into some self-development, but when I did that, when I went through that 4 month of doing that, it kind of launched me, right? A launch pad of I was at my work, but mentally I was here where I am today. And
Mm.
so, and then, yeah, I got my first deal. And from there, man, just down the road, it went history, right? Like I ended up, I am where I am right now because I didn't give up. I pushed through everything.
I love that, man. Nah, that's
Yeah.
great. And man, that's a lot of perseverance. I mean, you said 10 months?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man. So how do you keep going through all that, man? I feel like 10 months, that's a long time to like
It
not
is,
be
bro.
doing the
It is,
work and not
brother.
seeing the results.
Absolutely. So a couple of things, right? Like, and I was working, mind you, right? Like I was
Hmm.
still working on my job, and I wanted to do. I knew for a long time, even before I found the vehicle, which is real estate wholesaling. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I always wanted to be my own boss. If you look at my resume, like I'm probably not employable
Hmm.
because I've had so many different jobs. I've started so many different businesses. I just didn't know like what was the thing that I wanted to do. And when I found out about wholesaling, when I found out about real estate, that's the vehicle that I chose that I wanted to sell out for. So
Yeah.
that's the first thing, right? Is if you got to find something that you're willing to sell out for, whether you run into a problem down the road, like, hey, it was probably the wrong thing, but at some point you need to sell out for that thing. The second part is that I have a really, because of my faith base and the support internally with my wife and family, like that really helped me, right? I was always encouraged. Even in the days that I wanted to give up, it's important to really surround yourself with people who not only not only support you but are willing to push you, right? Because there's people that are going to say, oh yeah, that's awesome that you're doing that, but when they see you where you're giving up, see, I told you not to get into that, right? It's
Yeah.
like they keep pushing you. So
Hmm.
that's important. And if it's not family, a lot of times you have to go out of that, right? You have to get out of that circle if it's not family. And so that's what kept me going, man. Like my wife really pushing me. My kids would help me, right? Fill out the yellow letters, my son would help me go put up bandit signs. My in-laws were pushing me a lot. They saw how much I was working towards this thing. And really, I mean, there was times where I did want to give up, like, man, this doesn't work. And then eventually, like, it ended up, working out.
Man, that's great, man.
Yeah,
Yeah, 'cause I feel like that's the 3 feet from gold thing, man. I feel like what if you quit 9 months? What if it was, right before you got that deal and you never would have known? And like who knows how different your life could have turned out if you never
exactly.
got that.
And you know what's crazy is, so I took a job, supposedly, right, and it was supposed to be like a for now, right? Let me go work for
Hmm.
now. Obviously, make some income. I've always worked. I've been working since I was like 16.
Hmm.
And the stint turned into like 4 years,
Yeah.
4.5 years. And when I went to quit my job, here's that. Not only was I running into adversity and also like having to push myself and understanding all this. When I went to quit my job, I was really really close with the owner of the company. And so we called him Nash. That was his name. So I said, "Hey Nash, I got to talk to you." And I was like, "Hey, I'm giving you my 2 weeks notice." Because I'm doing this real estate thing. You already know that. I already been planting the seeds, right? Talking
Hmm.
to them what I was doing outside of work and all that. But it came down to the point where it's time to quit, right, and move on. And man, he took it pretty hard. He's like, "Oh man, what did we do? What can we do better?" And I was like, "Man, honestly, like it's nothing you guys did, man. It's just something that I've been working on, something that I've been, pushing towards, working full time." He's like, "There's something that we could do, maybe so you could stay here and do that." And I'm like, "I don't think so, man, because it's not gonna work." And the next words out of his mouth, I kid you not, were, "What if I gave you $5 more an hour?"
Mm.
And I was like, "Oh, because somebody that's working at a regular W-2, that's a lot of money,
Yeah.
right?" I was already making like $23 an hour, right? Somewhere around there, 23, $22 an hour. So he offered me $5 more, and it took me back a little bit, right?
Mm.
Out of respect, I told him, "You know what, Nash? Let me do this. Let me go home. I'm gonna think about it, and then I'll get back to you the next day. How about if we do that so that we don't go back and forth?" He's like, "Okay, I respect that." He goes, "Absolutely." And so on my way home, it was a 45-minute drive from where I was working at that point at the job site all the way to my house. So I had an opportunity to really think about this, right? I already had been working on my self-development. I already had been working on the things that I needed to mentally prepare for this next phase. Like I was ready to jump into it. But the one thing that came into mind was, that hit me pretty hard, was like, wait a minute, if I'm really worth that extra $5 an hour, why am I not getting that now?
Right.
Right? Why am I not getting that money now? And that was kind of like, that was really the dividing factor of, because $5 an hour will keep you, right?
Hmm.
Like that's a lot of money. And now I make a joke, and eventually I will write it someday, is don't sell your dream for $5.
Mm.
That's write a book.
That's great, man. I feel like there's a lot to that if we break that down because, I feel like every time you make a big leap like that, even if you already got the deal and you already know, hey, it's possible, it works, you know it works. You have the information there showing that it works and you can do it. But I feel like every time you make that big leap and you kind of leave, security, or you make that jump, I feel like whatever you want to call it, universe, God, there's like little obstacles or roadblocks that kind of come up. Like, oh, how bad do you really want it? It's like, because that $5 that time, I'm sure that sounded great. Like, oh,
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's the thing, right? Like, it's the obstacles are always going to be there, and this is why I said earlier. That's why for your audience and those that are listening, is understanding that self development rarely supersedes, right, your income, your potential. Because if you are going to chase something, it's not whether if, it's when that
Mm.
obstacle is going to come in, when you're going to run into that roadblock, and then what are you going to do about it, right? Like that's really what it's going to come down to. Because most people always look at success, but to me, what I always say is success only shows you that it worked. The
Mm.
failure, the struggles, everything else, that process is where you really where you're built, right? When that success piece comes in, like, oh cool, it worked, right? That's really most people look at that piece but don't look at that other piece of the process.
Mm. 100%.
Yeah,
That's really what it is, man. It's I feel like most people are scared to get started because they're afraid to fail. And I mean, failure is just part of the process, man.
it is,
You're gonna
man.
fail a lot more than you win.
It is. I mean, failure is part of the process, and I always tell people like, because they always ask me, "Do you ever have like desires to quit?" I go, "Absolutely, bro." Like,
Mhm.
I mean, that never goes away. As a matter of fact, it gets even harder when you build. You know, when you get to like there's different levels, right? Of hard. Like you have your first level, hard to get started. Then you got your next level, third level, level 10, right? Like it becomes a lot more difficult because what happens is the thing that you're building and the thing that you're going after is going to demand even more from you from level 1 to level 10, right? And most people don't ever look at that either. I mean, like, yeah, I always do. Those thoughts never stop. What you have to do is you got to be able to drown those thoughts out with that's why self-development should never stop, excuse me,
Mm.
because you have to be able to drown that noise of wanting to quit out, and elevate that noise of why you're doing this. You know, what's your potential, what you're looking forward to, what happens if you do this. Because if not, that noise of, hey, you don't deserve it, you should quit now, like that's never that's gonna, that can definitely make you do it for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So yeah, so let's switch gears a bit. Definitely want to talk about sales and closing. Yeah, I've been in sales since I was 18 legally, so my whole life in the sales, one way or the other.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of people say they're the best, they're great. But I hear their stuff and it's not great. But I've checked out your content and and I've heard you on calls and you're the real deal.
I
How
appreciate it,
did you
man.
get started in sales, man? Did you do sales prior to getting into wholesaling?
Yeah, so definitely I've always loved sales, right? I think one of the things that people make a mistake is separating sales and entrepreneurship.
Hmm.
Entrepreneurship is sales at the end of the day, right? When you look at sales, it's solving a problem, and entrepreneurship is the same thing. Now, as far as the sales positions, yeah, I've had a variety of sales positions in the past, and it wasn't like a consistent, right? Like I didn't spend 5 to 10 years in sales. Like I would work like 2 to 3 years in sales, but I always loved it because it had that entrepreneurship connotation.
Mm.
But I got out of sales for like 4.5 years. That's a long time, like to be out of
Yeah.
sales, right? But I've always loved it. I've always had a passion for it. And then when I got into real estate, I needed to get back into that, right? So prior to that 4.5 years, I had about 5 years, 5 to 8 years experience in sales, right? Taking different sales positions. Then I got out of it, and then when in 2015 when I got into real estate, I started getting back into it and getting my skill sets back up. So I've never had what you would say a 10 to 15 year like this straight line, right, of
Yeah.
sales experience. Where my career was where I separated in my career was when I started back in 2015, right? I knew I had to get back into elevating my sales skills. In 2018, I decided to even slingshot my sales career even further, which was where I actually invested money, and I ended up joining the Sandler training system.
Mm.
So I did that for 5 years straight, and that's where my training just took another level.
That's awesome, man. That's
Yeah.
right. One of the things I really like that you do is the third party stories. Can you break down how you use those and what that is?
Of course, third party stories are really powerful. And there's a lot of reasons why, right? But I'm gonna give you 3 reasons why. So the most powerful ones is number one is you're not in the line of fire. Okay. So what does that mean? That means that when you are offering a solution, when you're offering I would say when a prospect has an obstacle that they need to get over, or even when you're trying to offer features and benefits, most of the time when you talk to the seller, when you talk to your prospect, excuse me, and you offer features and benefits, or you solve a solution, right, or you help them overcome whatever obstacle they're having in their mind, and you do it directly, typically prospects usually feel like they're being sold. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like,
They get
oh,
a
you're
little
just saying
defensive.
that. Yeah. What's that?
They get a little defensive.
Yeah, get a little defensive. Like, oh, you're
Hmm.
just saying that so I can go with you, right?
Hmm.
So a third party story will actually help you so you're not in the line of fire, right? So what you can do is you can introduce an experience or someone that you've helped in the past with the same problem, right? And here's the second part that comes into that. When you're telling that third party story, what happens is that prospect that you're talking to, it helps to fire up their imagination. Like, okay. So you help them that way. Okay. And then I'll come back. I don't know, Kai, if you would feel comfortable us doing something like that for you.
Mm.
Now they've heard the story. Their imagination is firing up, listening to how you solve that problem, right? And now I come back to you, and I won't even apply the solution to you. It's more of I don't know if that would help you in a sense, because I want you to say, you know what, that probably would help me. Okay, perfect. And then we move on. So again, we have you're not in the line of fire, fires up the imagination. And the great thing too is third party story will also help you say what you feel, right? A lot of times we're scared to like really tell prospects how we feel. So you can share a third party story. And one big example in this is when you call prospects and they're like, well, give me your offer. You call me, give me your offer. You know what, Kai? I wish I could. The last time I gave an offer like that, Max actually hung up on me, and I don't want that to happen with you, right? So a lot of times you can use it. So you can use it in that aspect of being direct with the seller. You can use a third party for that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great, man. No, that's killer. I started implementing that after hearing you use it, and it's it works really well.
It works really well because again, I said those three things, right? Very powerful. You're not in the line of fire. Fires up the prospect's imagination, and then the third thing is that you can be very direct with the prospect by using a third party story. Yeah.
Right. Now, I also like how you use it. You can like, future pace, so you can like paint the picture. Like this is how it's going to look when it's all said and done, and you're getting them thinking in, solution based too, as opposed to them being defensive. So, man, I love that a lot. Yeah. What are some other closing strategies or sales techniques that you use that work really well?
So, one of the things that I see a lot of people struggle in is actually getting the conversation going. I think, you and I both know, especially you've been in sales for so long, and I see that you're doing your live calls. One of the things that you and I both know is that in the beginning, the sale is made or it's broken, right? In the beginning. And a lot of people struggle to launch that, to launch to a high level conversation based on what how they're approaching the introduction, how they're presenting their introduction, the pitch, and their questioning, right? So I think what happens, especially in wholesaling, we'll talk about that. We have their data, so we know their name and address, right? We have all the information. We have their phone number as well too. And a big mistake that I always see people make is always asking for that person, or is that person there, or may I speak with, right? And it works for some people. I'm not saying that don't do this. Absolutely don't do it. But if you're running into a situation where it's consistently creating unnecessary objections for you, you might want to get away from that, right? So if you have the data and you have the phone number, and I know that if I'm calling Kai, right, and I say, and I'm not going to ask if you're there. I'm going to assume that it's you, and I'm just going to go, hello, Kai. Hey, it's Max. I'm calling because, you had spoken to one of my team members about selling your property over at 123 Main Street, right? Very streamlined, confident. It instills confidence in the prospect as well, because you're not confused looking for, well, what's this about, or why are you looking for that person? So I think that's one recommendation that I make to people that are prospecting is get away from the just, right? I'm just looking for, or I'm trying to reach, because it creates unnecessary objections for you. And I'm all about that, is not creating any unnecessary objections when it comes to that. Second thing that I can talk about, like strategies as well in the beginning of a conversation, is make sure that you always know what to ask, right? Don't be all over the place. Write your top 3-4 questions down that you can have in front of you, so that way you're consistently always going about getting the conversation going, correct? A lot of people are kind of all over the place. Sometimes they're talking about conditions, sometimes they're talking about, price, and you're kind of all over the place, and the prospect is relying on you to instill confidence in them.
Right.
And, and you have to be very consistent with that when it comes to that. And for me, and this is the golden nugget here, is that when I am in the beginning of the conversation, first, that's the way I do my intro. Then my pitch is really very clear, concise, why I'm calling. And then the questions that I ask have nothing to do with price, have nothing to do with condition. And then the third thing is that I don't want to be getting too much deep into pain questions. My goal for the beginning of the conversation is to figure out if I have a prospect or a suspect. And the way I do that is by measuring them against these three things: cooperation, engagement, and reciprocation. Okay, so that means that is the prospect being cooperative to these non-invasive questions? Is this a rental property? How long have you owned it? Okay, is it vacant? Non-invasive questions, right? Very general questions. Are they engaged with me? Are they cooperating? And then are they reciprocating? Are they, if I'm in a neutral tonality, are they like being like, are they too aggressive? What's going on? Now I don't need to have all three, but if I can get at least one or two, I can work with that. You know what I mean? And I don't get happy ears on a call. I'm just waiting for their response on everything. So.
No, I like that a lot. Yeah, I've never put that into those words, but yeah, I feel like kind of always get that feeling like if they're, being short and guarded, or, are they opening up and actually giving me answers or being defensive. But no, that's great. I definitely, 100% agree.
Well, here's the thing, guys, is this is where you're, a lot of people talk about listening skills, but they don't ever say, like, they don't ever give you the breakdown. What does that even mean, right? Do I just shut up and listen? Like, no, that's not what that means. It means that as soon as the call starts, you don't know yet who you have on the other side, right? You don't know if you have grandma or if you got Max or Kai. They're going to be like loud, right? So this is the breakdown of why you should activate your listening skills, is understand what is coming from the other side based on their aggression, on their pitch, right? Their tonality, their energy. That's so you can actually match that. That's why you need to have your listening skills need to be activated for that reason. That's the breakdown of that. So you can match that. You don't want to be talking to a grandma the way you would be talking to, a red personality, right? Quote unquote. You don't want to be talking to a red personality the way you would be talking to a grandma. But most people do. They just want to, ram what they're calling for without actually realizing what's coming on the other side and how is that coming. And this is why the active listening skills need to be superb for that reason. Yeah.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I definitely love talking about that intro, really that first 4 seconds or 6 seconds. I don't know what the latest studies say, but that's where you build all the rapport. You're getting that if you have an awful intro and you don't have your intro dialed in front of you, I like to have, I don't know about you, I'm sure you're probably the same way, but I like to have my scripts in front of me, even though I know the script, I've read it a million times, I still have it in front of me so I can just focus on my tonality and then really nail that intro, because that's going to dictate, the whole rest of the call and if you get anywhere.
Professionals always have their questions, their intro, their questions, and then I'm going to give you a third one, which is their 2 outcomes. Right? Now, depending if you're cold calling, your 2 outcomes are going to be different. Depending if you're following up with warm leads, your outcome's going to be different. So I'm in a position where anything that hits my calendar, it's all already been through a cold caller. It's been through a lead manager. So my 2 outcomes are this. Number 1 is to get a contract. That's always the focus, right? That's the number 1 focus. Now, the second outcome, I don't know yet, because I don't know where this prospect's going to lead this conversation, and I have to come up with that on the fly. But it's usually a clear outcome, future outcome, follow-up, right? That's really the second outcome. So again, professionals always know when they need to have that, and you're doing a good job at it, right? You have your script, you have your questions, and then your rebuttals as well. Your objections and rebuttals should be in front of you. And like I said, always having at least 2 outcomes based on the call, whether it's a cold call, follow up, or even a negotiation calls. That kind of helps you to know which way to actually take the conversation to.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely agree with that. So breaking that down a bit, now you said anything you touched now, it's kind of already been through your process. Can you kind of break down what your process looks like and what happens when, like, from A to Z, like or just high level overview, but like a lead comes into the system or there's a prospect, they get turned into a lead. What does that look like?
Yeah. So right now we're working with PPC calls and also cold calls, right? So we're working with both. On the PPC side is basically, obviously the lead gets generated, it comes into the system, and then a lead manager hits that lead, and then they set an appointment based on with all the information. Once that lead comes in, we get tagged, right? Hey, here's an appointment. And we usually already have, like tomorrow, like say today, right? We usually already have about 6 to 9 appointments lined up already, whether they're back to back or whatever it is. And then either myself, every now and then I'll jump in, but I have Daniel who's collaborating with me. He's actually taking on a lot of those appointments for me when I have busy days. Like yesterday, I was judging the Closer Olympics, and then today I'm here with you on the podcast. So then he takes them, and then he basically follows up with them, qualifies them, or basically they disqualify themselves. We put them through the sales process, and the sales process is always the same with every single prospect. Until we get into the conversation, we make the adjustments. So that's how the PPC side works. Very simple. When there's a follow-up, we only have 3 buckets on a follow-up: hot, cold, hot, warm, and cold. We've simplified. That's as simple as possible, right? So a hot is anybody that wants to sell 30 days or less. and we set up a follow-up, or we do have an actual negotiation appointment with them. A warm is someone like that's either 30 to 60 days, sometimes 90 days, just depending on the conversation, right? They're just not ready. They got a lot of other stuff that needs to happen before they do. They're just starting the process of selling. And then cold, not necessarily are they dead. They're just, they tell us like 6 months down the road. That doesn't mean that somebody's not following up with these people, right? Like they're following up. Like if they say 60 days, like somebody's following up with them in 3 weeks or 4 weeks, because things change. You have to remember that. So that's the 3 buckets they fall in. And of course we have other stuff, right? Like we'll have, a nurture section where people that we can't get a hold of, we got a lead manager and automation that follows up with them in there. On the cold call side is more manual because these leads are coming from the cold caller directly. And then we have Alexis, who's actually following up with those leads, does a really good job. And he takes them from contact to close. Like that's what he does. And then if not, same process, put them into those 3 buckets. Yeah.
No, that's great, man. I appreciate you breaking that down.
Yeah, of course.
Now, do you guys is it like a 2-call sales process, or is it does it differ for PPC to the cold call? Or are you guys trying to get the contract on that first call, or are they going through a process first?
So I'll answer that. It depends,
Yeah.
right? So for that rule of thumb, and I know there's some people that definitely live and die by the 2-call. And then there's some people who definitely live and die by let's lock it up on that 1 call. Don't let them off the phone. I'm in the middle. So I'm in the middle. And the reason, and I'm going to say this, right? Very political answer. And the reason why I say this, I definitely would not do a 2-call if I know I have a prospect that fits into, remember those 3 things I said? They're being cooperative, they're engaged, and they're reciprocating the information back to me. So if I'm in the middle, if I'm in the sales process and it's a mutual conversation to where it's being elevated and moving the sale forward, I'm not letting them off the phone. I'm not doing that. So that's the way I measure that, right? Is this too much? And then if I know that it's too much for the seller because they don't have all the information, maybe all the parties aren't involved, then we make the decision and say, okay, we don't want to push this anymore. We want to make sure that we have everybody that's going to have an input be on the phone, or we need to do due diligence on this because we don't know yet how bad it is, or we need mortgage information, or we need pictures and things like that. So the call is being measured by those 3 things: cooperation, engagement, reciprocation, right? And then we make the decision whether, hey, so it's left up to the quality of the conversation, whether we do a follow-up, or we do or we close it on that same call. Now, I will say this: most calls, I can tell you, 8 out of 10 calls are going to end up on a follow-up. So I want your audience to know that follow-up is where you make your money, and 8 out of 10 calls are going to end up on your follow-up, right? And you have to understand that, and we've heard this a lot, right? Like the money's in the follow-up, and social media ruins everything, right? All the good stuff. And so I just wanted to make that aware that 8 out of 10 calls do end up on a follow-up, but we measure whether we do a second call or we try to go all the way for the close based on the quality of conversation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, it's better to have that strategy and treat each one, as an individual call.
Each one independent. Yeah, you got to, qualify the lead, work it to its maximum potential. And if that means setting up a follow-up, if that's the maximum potential of that lead, then book there's nothing wrong with that, man. Don't get caught up in this hype of, 1 call close or, things like that. Like, no, work the lead to its maximum potential. And that maximum potential can mean that you have to set up a follow-up. That's it. But make sure you follow up. Right.
Yeah. No, really, it's really follow-ups where, all the money's made. Like
it is.
Someone exactly. Called it, if you want to make that FU money, FU stands for follow-up. Like,
dude, I'll tell you about the deal right now. We're working. We got to mail this guy the contract. It's in North Carolina. We've been following up with this guy since February of this year, right? How many months is that? February, March, April, May, June. We're almost for 4 months, right?
Yeah.
4 months now. And we finally came to an agreement on a price. The guy's been traveling. He's been going back and forth. He's been talking to other people. But because we've been following up with him consistently, we finally on yesterday or day before, we ended up coming to an agreement on price, which is a great deal, by the way. We're ARV on that deal is 220, 215, 220. We're getting it for 150. But the house, we got the pictures, and the house is immaculate. Like, this thing is ready to. We might end up taking that one down and listing it on the MLS. But again, this deal wouldn't have happened if we didn't follow up with him, right? 4 months later, we're still following up with him, and we're getting this deal locked up. I mean, it sucks that we got to, do this whole thing. That's the way he wants it, so we have to tailor to the seller for that.
That's yeah. No, it makes sense though, man. That's definitely, I love those. When you just keep following up and finally it pays off. It's always frustrating the other way, but when it pays off, it makes it all worth it. So what does your follow-up process look like? How frequently do you guys follow up, and like what kind of conversations?
I was going to get into that automatically, but I love that question. So here's the thing, right? Is you've heard the saying is that you can't beat a dead horse to run. So the way I look at this is a lead comes in, whether it's cold call, whether it's PPC. What we're doing is our goal is to do 8 attempts on every lead. Now that doesn't mean one call. So let's say a lead comes in today and I call that lead right now 3 times, triple dial, double dial. That's 1 attempt. If I call that lead later on in the afternoon, double dial, triple dial, that's 2 attempts, right? So that's the way we're measuring the attempts. And then what I'll do is we'll move that lead for 30 days or under because it's a new lead, right? We don't want to put it on we're going to leave it as a hot for right now because we haven't talked to them, right? So that's a brand new lead. We want to make sure it stays in the pipeline. Then, we'll follow up with it on Monday or Tuesday because we still have new leads coming in. We got to pay attention to those. If at the 8th attempt, we see that lead is not responding, obviously they're getting text message as well. So we might get a response, right? Let's say that we did 2 attempts today, and then on Monday they respond, then those attempts reset. And so the way they reset is based on, is the sale moving forward, or is this person just playing around and not really serious about selling? So you have to have that measurement too, right? Because a lot of people follow up and they don't really they follow up just to talk to sellers, right? Chit chat with them. You can't be doing that, right? Like, yeah, you can check in. Like, I'm a believer, right? Like, if someone says, call me back in 3 weeks, I'll call them back in 2 weeks and I'll just say, hey, this is Max. I'm not calling about buying your house. The only reason I was calling you was just to see if there's anything I can help with. We have a lot of resources that we can tap into. I just want to make sure that there's nothing here that we can do for you. So there's a way to follow up with someone. And the one thing that you're looking for there is that you're wanting a response for them to say, you know what, Max, things have changed actually, and I am ready to sell. This is why when someone says, call me back in 30 days, you call them back in 15 days, right? Because of that. Things change so fast.
Right.
So going back to the point of where the follow-up, after the 8th attempt, it goes into a nurture bucket, where the system picks it up, or lead manager. So that's kind of what the follow-up looks like. Because we have new leads coming in. We're not just having new leads coming in. We're negotiating, right? We have deals that are in our due diligence. We have offers that are out. So but we still want to give the leads. We're all about the phone call, man. Like, we want them to pick up the phone. And then once we have exhausted the capability of getting them on the phone, we let the system take over from there. Yeah.
No, I love that. Yeah. Same perspective for me. Everything I do, whether it's, I do a lot of like SMS and voicemail drops, but the whole point of that is just to get them on the phone. That's where you have the most control. And that's what works best for me. So no, I love that, man. I know you kind of touched on it before with the hot, warm, and cold buckets. What dictates which one of those they fall into?
Yeah. So hot is anything that's ready, that's 30 days or less and no contact, right? Like, say it's a new lead that comes in. I'll just start from the bottom here. So hot would be this new lead comes in. We call them. They haven't answered yet. We want to keep it in the hot bucket because it's a brand new lead, right? We want to make sure, but there's tags too as well, right? Like, it stays in hot and then it's new lead, no contact yet, first attempt, right? So you have these extra tags. If we do make contact and we have somewhat of a conversation, and for me, conversation is this, which is motivation and timeline. So if I know Kai needs to sell in the next 30 to 40 days because he's got to move out of state, then I've established motive and I've established timeline. That stays in the hot, right? We want to make sure that we keep an eye on that one. We set a follow-up date. And then the third factor is that if I talk to someone, they say, hey, you know what, Max, I actually do want to sell, but right now, not a very good time to talk. What I want to do is please give me a call back in like a week and a half. That stays in the hot as well too. So those 3 things, right? If they don't answer, we keep it in the hot, but we tag it no contact first attempt. If they answer and then we have the conversation where we measure where we get motive and timeline, that's like really hot, right? And then if they answer and they say, hey, Max, you know what, I do want to sell, but for right now, I don't I don't have time, please give me a call back in 2 weeks because I got some stuff that I'm taking care of. So that's 30 days or less, right? And so we'll leave that in there. Then we move into warm. And warm, what happens in warm? So the first one where we once we get to like after 4 attempts, they'll move into warm because we haven't been able to get a hold of them because we want to get them out of that bucket. So the first 3 attempts, they stay in hot. After between 3 and 8, they stay in warm. So we move them out of that hot bucket. And then the warms are those people that, let's say those people that answer, right? And they say, you know what, Max, I do want to sell, but I'm thinking somewhere between like 30 to 40 days, maybe 50 days. I don't know yet. I got some things going on with work. They'll go into a warm bucket. That's about it, right? Like nothing goes into a warm bucket unless we've attempted to contact a new lead 3 times. They haven't answered. We're going to move it now for attempt number 3 to 8 in that warm bucket. Or we made contact and they're not ready to go till after, day 30 to 90. That goes into the warm bucket. Real simple. That's the warm bucket. On the cold bucket, all we're doing on the cold bucket is either they are already working with someone, because remember, just because they're working with someone does not mean that they already got they're complete, right? Remember that. Or they give us this timeline of 90 days or more, 6 months out, right? Like, this is a question I like to ask. This is why I like to ask. Let me get to sellers when I'm talking to them. I always say, I make an assumption like, hey, so let me get this straight. So you're looking to get this done what? Maybe sometime by January? No. I need this done like quicker than that. Or some people will say, yeah, I'm thinking somewhere around January. Okay, so do you want to be done with the process in January, or do you want to have your money by January?
Right.
Those are 2 different conversations. No, I'm probably not going to do anything until January. Well, that's going to move into a cold bucket for me, right? Just because now that doesn't mean nobody's following up with them. It just means that, you know what I'm saying, like that their timeline is so far away that now the system has to take care of that, not us personally. Mm-hmm. So that's the way those 3 buckets get filled. Yep.
I love that. No, it's great. It's simple, easy, and I like how you have the rules.
You gotta simplify it, bro. And leverage your system. And if you don't have systems, that's okay. Leverage whatever you have, simplify it, create those 3 buckets, and then under those 3 buckets, don't have 10 different tags and 10 different like. Maximize the simplicity of this, right? Most people complicate it too much.
Yeah, 100%. So
there's a question in the chat, huh?
Yeah, we get through those 2. Yeah, if anyone has questions, feel free to drop them in there. We'll go through all those in a second. But yeah, we'll have the Q&A portion in just a minute. So yeah, if anybody has questions, make sure to drop them in there. But final question I have, we'll wrap it up and get to those. If somebody's brand new, they want to get into wholesaling, but they have no sales experience, where do you recommend they start? Are there any books you'd recommend? I know you have a lot of great content too. Is there where would you recommend they start learning how to sell, or really learning sales skills?
Yeah, I think for me, honestly, it's all about asking the right questions, to be honest with you. Like if you can build, let's say that you're working on your intro or whatever the case may be, if you can get to a point where you can ask powerful questions that move the sell, and understanding that that's going to, because here's the thing, right? In like 10 years ago, you could be a walking brochure, right? Like, hey, look at me, here's what I can do for you, right? And people would come to you. But that has changed because of why? Because of this, right? People are so informed. It doesn't mean they're smarter. They're just more informed now, that if you come in as a walking brochure, like, you're going to look like, well, I already have all the information. So what do we have to be now? We have to be a collector of information. And you can't collect information without knowing what to ask. So there's a book called, there's 2 books. One of them is Asking Questions, the Sandler Way. That book is actually really, really, really good. It actually helps you to lay a system out of what questions to ask and where to ask them, right? Asking Questions, the Sandler Way. And I think the author to that is Antonio Garrido, right? Antonio Garrido. It's a small book, very powerful. And then the second book, it's called Questions That Sell by Paul Cherry. Amazing book. And I would start there. Those 2 books, honestly, like, if you're in sales and you're wanting to get better at asking questions, you got to make sure that you have to, you got to make sure that you get in a position where your questioning is very critical, right? Like, what questions to ask next. And that's where most people struggle, right? That's where you get the and not knowing where to go. That's why I always recommend is always make sure you have your questions in front of you that push the sell forward. So those 2 books. And then the third one that I would recommend, so you can work on tonality, so you can work on mirroring and labeling, is Chris Voss's book. What is it called? Never Split the Difference.
Yeah, that's a great one.
But get the audio, man. I know it's not him. I know it's not him narrating, but the guy that narrates it does a phenomenal job, man. He does a phenomenal job. You get to hear how the tonality should be, right? Like you get to hear how the labeling should go with I love how he labels, but then also has like the downward inflection on the pitch. Like he does such a phenomenal job. And I always recommend people getting that book in Audible just because, it's one of those that you can't just read it, man. Like you actually have to listen to it in order to get the full like perspective of what's going on. So, but I love it though. Those 3 books, man. Those are real simple books to read. I think for the most part, if you can get into those books, and like I said, the most powerful thing is learning how to ask questions.
100%. It's funny. Never Split the Difference. I slept on that book for a while. I kept hearing about it, and I'm like, it's kind of my ego. Sometimes it took me a while to realize my ego. It's like always in my way when I was younger. I kept hearing about the book, kept hearing about it. I'm like, I don't know what this guy's going to teach me about business or sales. He's like an FBI negotiator. And then I read
most people do. That's so funny, man. Most people do. They're like, what does this have to do with what I'm doing? Like, how is it? This guy's negotiating, life and death situations, right? What is it called? Did I lose you?
No, I'm still here.
Oh, okay, got it. Sorry, I don't know what happened here on my end. Most people think like, how is this going to help me, right? Is this going to help? Like it's the framework, right? It's the body. It's like the approach. It's the strategy. And I'm pretty sure you're probably like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I read it. I'm like, oh, that stuff's great. I'm like, some of them, like, I don't know if it'll work, but I'll try it. We'll fuck around and find out. And
I mean, the worst thing that can happen, like, hey, it didn't work, right?
Yeah.
Like, we basically, I tried it. It didn't work for me, but you'll find out that it definitely works.
Yeah, it works. Yeah, I tried it, and I'm like, wow, I couldn't believe how well it worked. I was just blown away, and I like ended up reading the book like 3 or 4 times, and I'm like, yeah, it's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's awesome, man. So yeah, and that's the other book you mentioned too. Questions That Sell. I haven't read the other 2 you mentioned. I'm gonna pick those up.
You should, brother. They're great.
Yeah, that's like the 2nd or 3rd time I've heard someone tell me to get that book. So I feel like when I keep hearing the same thing, I'm like, oh, it means I gotta go read that book.
Gotta go, brother. Yeah, definitely. And one thing is that I don't recommend books lightly. I only recommend books that I've read and that impact me and what I do. And I can tell you, those 3 books have been very impactful in the things that I do and I express and I show, right, in my calls and all that stuff. So
yeah, I love that, man. Yeah. But before we get to the questions, is there any other advice or any final thoughts you have on someone for someone that's brand new getting into wholesaling and kind of feels overwhelmed, doesn't know where to start?
Here's the thing that I see, right? When I first started, like, there wasn't a lot of noise, right? And that's the one thing that I'm happy that I started when there wasn't a lot of noise. But I also would have loved to have this access to communities. Like we have, there's so many communities. You got a good one. You got a really great community, right? I have a community as well in Discord. And so the one thing that I would say is you have to pick one thing, man. You got to pick one thing, and you need to make sure that you put the blinders on and work on that one thing until you're able to master it, which should be the simplest form, which is wholesaling, right? And the biggest experience that you're going to get, I know that you can do direct to seller. I know that you can do agent outreach and things like that. But you got to pick one, right? You got to be able to pick one and stop trying to fit everything else. Because here's the way I look at it. And how do you measure that? Like, how do you even measure that? So if it's going to amplify what you're doing, go by all means do it. But if it's going to take away your focus from what you're doing, then don't do it, right? Put it on the sideline. That doesn't mean at some point you're going to get to do it. It just means not right now. And so this is the problem that I see with a lot of people, especially today, with so much information, so much things to do, like novations and wholesaling and seller finance and subject to, and all this information coming at you. Like, pick one thing. If you're gonna wholesale. If you're brand new, you're gonna start wholesaling. If you're brand new and you want to do just seller finance and subject to, there's nothing wrong with that. But pick that vehicle, right, and run with it, and shut out the noise.
Yeah, I love that. No, I think it's so easy to get analysis paralysis and just get overwhelmed with everything out there. But yeah, if you just
especially
pick one
today,
thing,
man.
Yeah,
And then you know what, the other thing too, I guess, talking about the communities, jive with your tribe, right? I think,
Mm.
you like, I probably wouldn't fit in a lot of tribes, and that's okay. That's all right. A lot of people wouldn't fit in my tribe, which is fine. It's find a tribe that you can jive with. There's so many good ones out there, that you can pair up with.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's real cool when you find your right people too, and you find that tribe and that group, man. It's definitely something special.
It's a different level. Yeah,
Mhm.
different
But
level.
awesome, man. Well, I appreciate that. But yeah, let's jump into the questions, and as we go through these, if anyone has any more, drop them in the comments, and we'll get them
Let's
answered
go.
for
Where's the
you.
questions at? Let's go.
Let's see what we got. So we got a bunch of comments. We got Jared Stupski said Max is the best closer for sure. Excited for this interview.
I love it.
Got Claudio Diaz. Max, in your experience, how long are your deals taking to convert from lead generation to closed escrow? 3 months? Question mark. It's like,
Yeah, I like that. That's a great question. It all depends, man. Like, cause Claudio, and I know you're a little experienced. The On a straight wholesale, obviously, we're talking 30 to 45 days, right? Simple. Like from lead, where the lead comes in, conversion. And then right now we're converting with PPC, we're about anywhere between 1 to 7, 1 to 8. On cold calls, a lot much higher. Obviously, cold calls always going to be a lot higher. So on PPC, if it's a straight wholesale, usually it's about, average 30 days to 45 days from lead to close. But again, then you have, if it's an ovation, that's a longer time period. But if we're just specifically talking about just a straight wholesale, right now the average from lead to close of escrow, it's about 30 to 45 days.
boom. All right, perfect. And then we have Jan says, do you incorporate NEPQ with your flow?
So I think he's talking about like I've heard this. Let me think about this. I think this is kind of I've seen a guy talk a lot about this. This is like the emotional. I think it's like emotional persuasion. I want to say something like that, which means like solidify, like inserting your authority or something, and it's more of trust, building trust. And I don't know the whole framework of the emotional persuasion. I've heard of it and I've seen it. I do some of that. I've seen some of it. But my goal when I'm talking to a seller, when building rapport, is I am not focusing on them getting to like me. I know it's contrary to what people usually preach. My goal is to get them comfortable, and then comfortable enough to trust me to do business with me, right?
Right.
And the way I measure that is when I'm doing a training and people are like, well, Max, I thought you needed, people do business with people they like and trust. I said, I agree with you. But let me ask you a question: is if you looked at people that around you, let's pick family members. Would you trust them with to do business with them? Would you trust them to give them $10,000? Would you trust them right now to give them $20,000? Is it all your family members? They're like, no, there's some I wouldn't even give them $5 to.
No.
Well, there you go, right? You like them, you love them, but that doesn't mean you trust them. And so I take that model and I implement it into my flow, where my goal is to get them to feel comfortable and trust me to do business with me. Because, and there's different levels of trust, right? There's different levels of trust, which on the initial call, the first aspect of trust is to get them to trust me to ask questions,
Right.
to have a conversation with them, right? Then the second level of trust is to get more personal, right? Whether it's talking about a mortgage, whether it's talking about why they're looking to sell. And then obviously I want them and then the last phase of trust, there's 3 phases that I measure this. The last phase of trust is getting them to trust me enough to sign the contract, right? Most people think that just because they got the first level of trust, which is talking to you, that's going to get you for them to sign the contract. And that's not true. You got to go through the 3 phases of trust. And I definitely use some of that. I don't know the whole ins and out of the NEPQ. I'm not 100% familiar, but I definitely know there's like an emotional persuasion there, right? And it has to do with like gaining trust and like solidifying your authority. But definitely, I need to look into that for sure.
Yeah, I've never heard of it personally.
Yeah.
I just Googled it. It said, I think you're right on. Yeah, neuro emotional persuasion.
Yeah. I didn't know what
Yeah.
the other ones were, but I know it had something to do with like emotion and persuasion and stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm the same way. Yeah, I think a lot of people think building rapport and they want to talk about all this random shit and things have common. I think really you come across as you're professional and you come across as like you're someone that's going to get the job done and get it closed and you know what you're talking about. That's real rapport. That's real they trust you as a professional and somebody they want to do business with, and that's really the whole goal of the whole thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, because they can sit around and talk. Well, here's the other thing, right? To that aspect of what you just said is they can sit around and just talk to anyone, right? If they
Mm-hmm.
wanted to chit chat with someone. At the end of the day, you got to find out if this is a prospect that has a solution that that you need to solve, or has a problem, excuse me, that your solution can solve. And the way you do that is not by chit chatting, is by actually asking. That's why I'd recommend those books, is by asking questions that position you to move the sale forward, and understanding like, hey, you're and establish yourself as someone that means business, right? Now, it doesn't mean you can't be empathetic. It doesn't mean that you can be what is that other empathetic, relatable, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean that you can't be those things. It just means like too many people rely on
Right.
being too relatable. And again, it does not move the sale forward, and you end up talking about nothing that has to do with the sale of the property.
Mm-hmm. I think Jordan Belfort calls it going off to Pluto. Like, you want to stay on that straight
Yeah,
line where people are all the way up here. And like,
yeah. I like that. That's
but
awesome.
no, there's some great questions. Yeah, anyone has any more, feel free to drop them. Last thing I want to ask for you for my personal questions is go back to the faith. How does where does your faith come from? Have you always been a person of faith, and how does that tie in like with your business
Sure.
pursuits?
So I've never been a person of fate. Obviously, my childhood was really rough.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, I don't like. I've never met my actual biological father. Like, I've
Mm-hmm.
talked to him once or twice on the phone, but yeah, I've never met him in real life. I haven't talked to him in years now, but never had faith. My parents, my mom and my stepdad, she's been married to now for like 30 some years, but I've never went to church or anything. And so and again, I look at it all like God's plan, right? Like, that's really what it is. My wife grew up, living in a household full, with faith base, right? Like, all her life, that's all she did. And here comes this knucklehead, right? That absolutely has no idea, has
Mm-hmm.
no knowledge on everything. And so for some, we got put together, bro, for a purpose, right? Like, I've always looked at that. There's a purpose of why we got put together. She was a little on the side of, like, she was very structured, very like organized, right, and had a very strong foundation built around faith. And then here I come, right, very loud, never really had a care in the world, right. And so for some reason we connected, and that's really where the start of developing my faith. It took years. Like, after even we got married, man, it took like 3-4 years before I even like ended up really incorporating it into my life and actually giving into it, right? Because most people, even though they have that opportunity, they don't ever give into that. And so it took some rough stuff. Like, I almost lost my life, brother. Like, it really, yeah, I almost lost my life at some point. And that kind of was that was eye opening to me, right? So I surrendered to that. And so throughout the years now, like, everything I do, it has to be based around that, right? Like, I have really deep core values. My core values are, and one of those is that, right? Like, I always have to have that foundation. And I think that's it. And going to incorporating it with business, I always measure everything around that, right? Like, is what I'm doing right here, does that violate my core value, my faith core value? Is it violating my my commitment core value? So everything I do, I measure that. And I think that's part of why I've been able to have this longevity, the relevancy, right, starting a long time ago, is I give that to God, right, my faith,
Yeah.
all that. And I'm very open about it, right? Most people that have been around me, they know where I stand. I'm not like this pushy guy, right, that tries to, hey, you got to do it this way. But if you ask me what I think, like, I'm going to give you what Max thinks, right?
Right.
And you're always going to know where I stand. That's the one thing, brother. Like, you could ask anyone that's always been around me. You're always going to know where I stand. And when it comes to the faith thing, man, like, I've never hidden it. And I've actually I talk about it more than, I always get a lot of messages like, man, I love that you're always talking about it. I love that you're always showing it. Yeah, because I give that's my gratitude to giving back to that if it wasn't for my faith and my foundation, I wouldn't be here today, talking to Kai.
Yeah, same here, man. That's crazy how things work out. And I love that you're sharing that too, because, I feel like I didn't grow up with it either. And then, most people I did know, like, I thought of a certain way, like, kind of like Ned Flanders from The Simpsons, or like this perfect type of people. So I used to like knowing that there's like, regular people that, like, down to earth, that, like, are about that life too.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's a journey, right? And I think we all have that individual journey of us, trying to, find that perfection, not only in us, but in a bigger in something bigger, right?
Mm.
Whether for me it's God, right? For me it's my faith, and that's what I'm always striving for. And again, I measure everything based around that.
Man, I love that, man. Well, brother, thank you so much for coming on, man. I had a lot of fun. This was great.
Yeah,
Definitely have to do this
absolutely.
again. What's the best way for people to connect with you online, social media? I know you mentioned your community as well.
Yeah. So there's two ways. So Instagram's always the easiest way. I'm very active, very answering my DMs. I'm more than Facebook, more than any other platform. But you can see my handles right there. So if you guys want to follow me on Instagram, and then on Instagram, I have the links to all my communities. On Discord, we have close to like 400 community members on Discord. So if you want to join that community, I'm doing live trainings there on Mondays, and then my YouTube channel. If you guys, I have again, 60 plus videos, 120 plus hours of real live negotiation calls. If you guys want to find somewhere to start, for those of you that are watching this right now or even on the replay, if you want to find somewhere to start, you can start there, because I have, like I said, I have a lot of videos that are going to help you. I've had people I'm kidding, message me and say, hey, Max, because of your videos, I've been able to develop my sales process. I've been able to, I just locked up my first 3 deals or my first 2 deals. It's always great to hear that. And I always
That's so
recommend
cool.
people. Yeah. I always recommend people to go there and do that. Yeah, but Instagram's always the best one. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again, man. I really appreciate you coming on. Any final thoughts or anything you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I think, remember this, right? Be careful when you start your journey, and if you're brand new, is admiring people is okay. Okay, remember that. Like, if you see somebody that's crushing it, you see someone that's killing it, awesome. I've learned this lesson, right? I admire them. That's great. But when you get into comparison is when you're going to get into trouble. Don't compare your journey to someone else's journey. And the reason why is because you have no idea how they started, if they were funded, how they were pushed. And the second thing is that you might be comparing yourself to an illusion. So remember that work your journey, go through the process, and don't try to make shortcuts because you see an individual that you admire is doing it at a certain level that you think you need to be at.
I love that, man.
Yeah.
What's is there like a good way for people to decipher if they're brand new? Because I feel like it's so hard when you're new and you don't know what's real and what's not. I feel like as you're going through in the game, you're like, yeah, I know that's not real. But is there any way like a new person can kind of decipher that besides doing the work, or is it just doing the work yourself and seeing what
So
works?
I think the first thing is really getting into a community, right? You have a great community. I have a great community. And I don't think you have a lot of fluff in your community, right? Understanding is get with people that are relatable to you. And the second thing is that the first thing you need to do is look at what your core values are and measure that against your core values, right? So if I know that somebody is doing certain thing, and then I look at my core values and I say, you know what, like, I don't think that doesn't mesh with me, right? That what they're doing doesn't mesh with my core values. And that's really the most simplest form of measuring that and be able to identify that for the most part, because you won't be able to when you're new, of course. But I think getting into a community that's genuine, getting into a community that actually provides good support, right? They don't hide anything, they don't sugarcoat anything. And then the second thing is making sure that you start establishing your core values from day one, so you can measure whatever's coming at you based around that.
I love that, man. Core values are key for sure.
Absolutely.
But awesome, man. Well, hey, thanks again for coming on. Highly recommend everyone go give Max a follow. Check out his Discord. I got some cool stuff going on in there. Yeah, he's coming on YouTube too. So I appreciate you, man. Thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.